Over at bangthebook.com, we are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Lots of great stuff going on over there on a daily basis, including daily college basketball picks from Kyle Hunter, daily NHL picks from Parker Michaels, the NBA obviously on hiatus right now. We've got daily NBA content from Admir Algic and Alan Moody. We've got college basketball previews from Jonathan Willis. We've got esports stuff for the League of Legends. We've got soccer, 3 tennis previews today from Big Ten Watto. So lots of things going on over at bangthebook.com right now. Plenty of stuff for you to check out over there and hopefully find some edges out there in the betting markets. All right, well, let's get into the Monday Mailbag segment here. And, with the Monday Mailbag, you can reach out to me on Twitter at Skating Tripods, or you can email me, adam@bangthebook.com. That's how you get your questions on the Monday Mailbag here. I'll be doing this every Monday as we go throughout the rest of the daily shows. And once I get into my Bettor's Box segments on Monday and Thursday, I'll do the Monday Mailbag along with that as well. Some days over, April, May, June, July, and then, about the second week of August, we'll get back to the daily shows. But over those 4 months of the spring and summer, may do some one-off Tuesday shows, talk Kentucky Derby or, major golf tournaments or some stuff like that. So kind of give you an idea of what we've got going forward here with our Bang the Book schedule. But as far as the Monday Mailbag goes, that will be something that I do on a weekly basis here, answering your listener emails and the tweets that you send me. So at Skating Tripods on Twitter or adam@bangthebook.com. Those are the 2 ways you can get a hold of me with your questions. So from Bang the Book writer and longtime listener Rich Lamons asking me, you could choose only one of the following bar games for the rest of your life. What do you choose? Pool, darts, or Golden Tee? Like I said, with the Monday Mailbag, obviously a lot of these questions will be sports betting related. Some of them will not be. Like I said, I'll answer anything that's not about politics or my sex life. So anything you want to ask me about, anything you're kind of curious about, go ahead and shoot those things over. For me, it's got to be Golden Tee. I've really gotten into it over the last few years, and, it's nice to actually give off the appearance that I'm good at golf because I'm not good at actual golf. So Golden Tee, something I do really enjoy, and, it's also one of those things, too, where I don't really have to do too much. I start throwing darts, and all of a sudden my elbow hurts or something like that. I guess just a sign of old age here, but, I'd have to say Golden Tee. But, Rich's second question here, probably more along the lines of what our listeners are looking for in these Monday Mailbag segments. And Rich says here, sportsbooks have been very profitable long-term by trying to have equal action on both sides. They don't try to take a side, they try to take equal action. In this ever-changing industry, do you think there will be a time, even years down the road, where books start to take a side on certain games, leaving them exposed to a big loss or potential huge gain? This is a really interesting question because we almost to a degree saw something like this in the Super Bowl. We did see that sharp action come in on the Rams eventually, but we were, for a week and a half leading up to that game, we were looking at a situation where the books were really one-sided with New England money. And they were willing to take that position knowing that sharp money was coming in on the Rams, or maybe that they liked the Rams in the game because that game, again, if it was a regular season game, would have been probably Rams -1.5 on a neutral or Rams -1. And they had a little bit of an overlay there as it pertained to the line for the actual Super Bowl. So they had dug in. They had took a position there on that game. And, of course, they got fortunate that Rams money came in and balanced out the ticket counts because, as we all know, the Patriots did wind up winning and covering in that Super Bowl. As far as this question goes, I think it's hard because right now you don't have a lot of sports books out there willing to take significant sharp action and exposure that they can use to their advantage because they then know, what the sharp side is. A lot of books, especially in the offshore marketplace, they kind of shy away from taking that action. And I think that, when you look at the risk reward of taking positions here as an entity designed to make money, I think it's a very challenging thing to do, to leave yourself exposed on one side and just hope that the game plays out your way. I mean, keep in mind that, as we've talked about before here on the show, and as we've talked about before in this industry as a whole, that, we're talking about 55, 56% consistently being among the best in the business. So if you've got a sports book entity that feels confident hitting 56, 57% over the long term, the problem is that you're still going to be wrong 43 or 44% of the time. And if one of the games that's in that 43 or 44% is one of these games with significant exposure, you lose a lot of money. And it takes a long time to get that back, with the relatively low hold percentages in this business. So I don't think that we'll ever have an entity that's going to be willing to take a lot of strong positions. I just think that, you won't be able to find somebody willing to fund that. You won't be willing to find a financier, unless it's a very small group of exceptionally sharp bettors, like a syndicate that decides to try and get a gaming license and book action. I just don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's just too challenging to know which games are going to fall into that 44, 45% that you're going to lose. So I think it makes it really hard for sportsbooks to take that strong of a position, to leave themselves exposed, even if it's a game that could work out in their favor and they do wind up, getting a significant windfall from that game. I just don't think that it's anything that, that the sportsbooks are willing to stick their necks out there about. So, a long-winded way to answer that question, I don't think there will ever be a time for that. I think that the future of the business is going to be in the exchange capacity, something like a match book where the operator's taking a commission off of each play and bettors are just going up against each other, shopping around for the best lines. I think that's probably what we ultimately see here. Especially in terms of legalization, as maybe some European operators kind of creep over into the market. But I do think that we will see changes in the industry. We will see, maybe some lines that are set more from a quantitative analysis standpoint. But I don't think that we'll ever see a book really willing to gamble. The gambling, they want to leave that up to the bettors. They want to leave that up to the people that are making the bets. The entities themselves, the sports books, they don't want to gamble. They want to, as you mentioned in the question here, Rich, balance action as much as possible. They want to try and be able to free roll the game if they can. And taking a strong position one way or another makes it really, really difficult over the long term because, like I said, you don't know when those big losses or those big wins could be. And, you look at the volatility of the market and the variance that's out there in the market already, and the reason why books have the advantage, the reason why something like 1.5% to 2% of sports bettors can long-term actually make money is because they're the ones that have to bet into the variance. They're the ones that have to bet into the volatility. The sports books don't have to do that. So I don't think that their modus operandi in that regard would really change. But I think it's a great question. I think that, as we do see this ever-changing, ever-evolving business, I do think that we will see, some things that kind of challenge the status quo, but I don't think that this will be one of them. All right, we move on to our next question here. This one comes from Joe via email, and Joe says, I'm curious if you go over how you view key numbers on basketball spreads. More specifically interested in college basketball. I'm a football bettor at heart, and I know dead numbers between 3 and 7 have less value in football. But I'm curious how much you weigh the numbers between 3 and 7 in college hoops or any other key numbers you want to talk about, like spreads around double digits. Now, the thing really about college basketball is that just about every single-digit number can be a key number, just because of the nature of the scoring. In football, predominantly, 3s and 7s. In college basketball, obviously 1s, 2s, and 3s. So really any number can be a key number here. Obviously, you want to be on the plus side, of those solid integers. You'd want to be, if you like a team, you'd rather have 6.5 instead of 6. You'd rather have 7.5 instead of 7, stuff like that. Now, typically in the NBA, 7 winds up being a pretty key number because once you get above a 2-possession game, a lot of times the fouling will stop. In college basketball, it's not as foolproof because a lot of times these kids, either they don't think or they're just, there's no quit in those teams. Sometimes professionals can quit, as we see in the NBA with tanking all the time. But in college basketball, you generally have teams that are going to play it out until the final buzzer unless the coach is able to get their attention and call off the dogs. So in college basketball, I don't really think that there are key numbers. I think that every single-digit number can be a key number. Now, certainly you could look at 7 again as being a number that, is of pretty good importance because, again, like I said, sometimes teams get to a 3-possession game and they say, you know what, F it, we're good, we're done. But, When you look at it, maybe 5 is another number that tends to be a fall number. 3 is another very popular number in college basketball as well. I think it's really just one of those things where, you don't really want to buy off of numbers in college basketball. You don't want to buy down to a number with a favorite or buy off of a number and get the hook with a dog. I think you just want to try and scour the market and get those half points wherever you can find them. If you can get a 6.5 instead of a 6, obviously over the long term, you may win one more bet out of every 100, but at least it's going to be one more bet that you won instead of pushed. So you still want to shop around for the best numbers, as always, across all of the the different sports betting markets. But as far as college basketball key numbers go, I just don't think that there are a lot of them. I just don't think that it's such a high variance market for a lot of different reasons, and also because there's less predictability in those late game situations. You don't have NBA teams that back off and just take the loss. You have college teams that, and look, I mean, we've seen even this season, we've seen a lot of college basketball games with strange comebacks, fluky endings, all that type of stuff. So you can certainly understand why these teams, do go and play out the string and try to finish out the game. But, from a betting standpoint, in terms of, finding actual value on these key numbers and things of that sort, I don't think that it's really out there. It's too difficult to put yourself in the mind of an 18 to 22-year-old college kid and figure out when he's not going to foul. And obviously, too, we've seen some backdoor covers with late threes and stuff like that. That's another thing, too, is that, NBA teams are more likely to dribble out the clock. And college basketball games, that team that's a dog or that team that's losing, is probably going to get a final possession to throw up some Hail Mary three or something like that. So I don't really put a ton of stock into key numbers in college basketball simply because I think every number can be one. But again, try to shop around if you can and get that hook, get that half point, whether it's below a number on a favorite or above a number with an underdog. I think that those are two things that you really want to look to do and things that can help you from a long-term standpoint. So as we continue with the Monday mailbag here, again, my apologies as my voice is starting to tail off a little bit. Again, I'll try to edit out the coughing fits that I do have here on today's show. But like I said, I didn't want to leave you empty-handed after not doing a show last Monday. So trying to soldier through as best I can here with this Monday edition of Bang the Book Radio. Chris via email sent me a couple of questions here. Says it seems timely to have a deep dive into betting futures, particularly hedging strategies. This is a challenging discussion, and obviously this is one I'd like to have a stronger voice for. But as Chris continues in his email here, it would be great to hear some discussion of various strategies around different types of hedging philosophies. When should you begin to think about hedging? Best practices for deciding how much to hedge based on the odds or amounts initially wagered. Another cool angle would be the subtle differences in strategies from sport to sport. Hedging is a very complicated discussion. And I'll talk about this a lot with Kyle Hunter as we get to conference tournaments and as we get to March Madness as well. But it's hard because we can't tell you what to do. I imagine from a mathematical standpoint, there is an optimal formula for hedging these different types of things. But for a lot of people, it's personal preference. Again, it's based on, what your initial investment was, what your potential payout is. You got to keep in mind with the NCAA tournament that you need teams to win 6 games to cut down the nets. And that means that the lower the price, the longer you have to wait, the higher the price, the earlier you can look to hedge into one of those types of teams. So, it's hard because it all depends on your risk tolerance, your risk management, and also it depends on the matchups. If you've got a 200-1 long shot and you think that they match up pretty well with the teams in the second round and in the Sweet 16, well, maybe you let it ride. If you think that team has a matchup advantage to where they may continue this tournament run, maybe you let it ride. If you think that they run into a bad matchup, like they're a jump shooting team facing a team that, plays really good three-point defense in a tough shooting venue, maybe you've got to hedge a little bit quicker there. So that's the problem, is that there's really no hard line stance when it comes to betting the futures and hedging them. It's one of those things where, again, it's about your risk profile. It's about what you want to achieve. What you need to do, I think, is that when you put together your portfolio for the futures, I think you start to look at them and you say, okay, I've got this 100-to-1 team. I want to make X units. I want to get myself 5 units with a 100-to-1 futures shot. Maybe you put a half a unit on it and you say, I want to hedge to the point where I win 5 units. Well, what's going to be the best path for you to win 5 units? Is that first game a pick'em? Well, if it's a pick'em, maybe you want to look to put something on that opposing team right away. If they're favored by 6 or 7 points, maybe you wait it out a little bit. So that's what I think you really have to do is you have to look at your portfolio and decide what specifically it is that you want to achieve with all of your futures positions. Do you want to win 10 units on that 500-to-1 shot? If you play, let's say you play Kentucky or Kansas or somebody, in a 15-to-1 range or something like that, how many units do you want to make on that? If you say you want to make 5 units, well, you can't hedge until probably the Elite 8. So there are so many factors and so many intangibles that go into it. I know it sounds like a cop-out answer, and we will talk about this more as conference tournaments and March Madness come around. But all of it is on a case-by-case basis and a better-by-better basis. How much do you want to try to extract out of that position that you've taken? And if you're somebody who, you put a half unit down and you just want to win 2 or 3 units, well, your risk tolerance there is very, very low. If you want to make 10 units out of that 200-to-1 shot, well, your risk tolerance is going to have to be a little bit higher. Because if you try to do something to hedge into a 200-to-1 to where you're trying to make 10 units in that first questionable game, you got to put a lot of money out there. And then all of a sudden, that future that you have, it lost a lot of equity because you bet into it so much in the early going. So that's why it's such a tough line to walk, a very challenging thing when it comes to futures, and why, if people want some futures advice as we get into conference tournaments, as we get into March Madness here, if you don't mind, send us the actual bet amounts you have and the win amounts with those types of futures. Because, it's hard to say to somebody, well, I've got this 40-to-1 future on Texas Tech or whatever. What should I do with it? Well, I don't know. Do you have a half unit to win 20 units? Is it 1 unit to win 40? Is it 5 to win 200? I don't know. And that does dictate what you want to do from a hedging standpoint. And also, it will dictate when you want to hedge into that future. Tough thing to talk about here, speaking just in hypotheticals. But as far as various strategies, I think there are a couple of things I can mention here. One of them is that once you get to the NCAA tournament, or even especially in the conference tournaments, this is very true of conference tournaments, a lot of times you will run into a situation where the money line rollover is better than taking a futures position. So you simply get an initial position on that team to win, you bet it, and then everything you won from that first game, you put on that second game. Everything you won from that second game, plus your initial bet amount, you put on that third game. A lot of times the money line rollover can be a lot more profitable, especially in conference tournaments, but also when it comes to March Madness as well. So that money line rollover is a concept that we will talk about. It is something that we will try to go a little bit more in depth with as we get to conference tournaments and March Madness. But the money line rollover is another tool in your handicapper's toolbox there to where you can really look to maximize an investment. And one of the nice things about the money line rollover is that hedging is very easy. You simply stop betting. You stop betting that money line rollover. Or you can do a partial hedge and bet a smaller amount on that money line rollover. You don't have that luxury when you take a futures conference tournament. You don't have that luxury. Your hedge is to put more money out there. Whereas for a money line rollover, your hedge is just to simply stop betting it. So there are a lot of different things when it comes to the futures market, and we'll try to talk about as many of those as we can going forward here. But again, while I love the hedging discussion and the futures discussion, I also hate it because I can't give you a concrete answer. We can't tell you exactly what to do. Maybe from an optimized mathematical standpoint, there probably is a formula. But in my estimation, because it takes a lot to get into that. It takes a lot to get into the specific math and projecting the spreads for the games going forward and the money lines and all that type of thing. It is challenging, and it is something that you can do if you're so inclined. It's not really something we can do on the show here, but everyone's got a different risk portfolio, risk management style when it comes to a futures portfolio. So it is a little bit challenging, but we'll do the best we can as we go throughout the conference tournaments and March Madness. Chris's second question here in his email, talking about looking for some strategic and or quantitative techniques for analyzing football totals. So the discussions I hear pretty much across the board are closer to more situational type plays, looking at weather with wind, styles of play, recent over-under records, stuff like that. Says I've never heard of or seen anything like totals, power ratings, or techniques for building models to provide a good baseline or whatever. Now, that is something that Danny Vorgs does for us over at bangthebook.com. He does have a totals projection, and he's got those totals leans in that article over there every week, and we're certainly looking forward to the return of that once football rolls back around in September. But, when it comes to quantitative techniques, I mean, you can do the same thing that you do for, college basketball or the NBA. You look at it from a points per possession standpoint, a points per play standpoint. You can throw some yards per play metrics in there as well. Obviously you want to, use all of the data that's out there for you, and you can put together some sort of model to where, if team runs 65 offensive plays at X yards per play against a defense that allows X yards per play, there will be X number of possessions in the game. You can put that together, and a lot of times it's hard because, you have a pretty good idea when it comes to college basketball games of how many possessions there will be. When it comes to the NFL, you're not always sure. Turnovers can throw a wrench into things, stuff like that. So it is a little bit tougher, but you can do quantitative techniques like yards per play, points per possession, points per drive, red zone efficiency, stuff like that. I don't know of anyone that has one outside of Danny Vorgs, and I don't expect him to spill the beans with that. But it can be done, and I'm sure that there are people out there that are good NFL totals bettors for that reason, because they do have some sort of modeling in play there. So, and you look at, it's probably no different than college football, and I imagine Kyle Hunter has a college football model for projecting totals. And I don't know if he wants to share that on the show here. Maybe we'll revisit that when we get closer to football season, but, it can be done. Yeah, there are a lot of situational things, and then there are talking points we use here on the show. But I imagine for building totals models, again, yards per play, points per drive, points per red zone trips, stuff like that, it can be done. You can take any kind of statistics and put together a model. So, Chris, again, we'll probably talk more about that as we get closer to football season, but I imagine it is something that is done fairly often. Couple more questions here for the Monday Mailbag, and then I'll get a little bit of a break here with Kyle Hunter joining me on the program. But Jason via email reaching out says, what method do you use to determine how a pace battle is going to pan out? Say both teams are fairly even, play at completely different paces. What you want to do is you want to look at how they performed in games against other teams that play at a similar pace. You look at Conference USA, for example. Look at how teams played against FIU. Were they able to slow FIU down? Did they play to FIU's pace? Well, if they play another fast-paced team, they're probably going to play to that team's pace. If they're a team that, held FIU down, or the Citadel or somebody like that, then that's probably a team that will dictate the pace and the tempo in most of its games. So you basically want to compare against comparable opponents playing at a certain pace. That would be the best thing that I would say, because teams that are able to dictate pace more often than not are going to do it in all of their games. Teams that play at other teams' paces probably going to fall into that trap in every game that they play. So that's what I would look at there from a pace war standpoint, is take a look and see how they performed against teams that play at the pace of their opponents, see if they dictated the tempo or if the other team dictated the tempo. And also, too, I think it's a coaching thing as well. I think better coaches, their teams are going to dictate the pace more often than not. So that's another thing to consider as well. An experienced coach, a coach with a strong foundation, a coach with a veteran team, they're probably going to dictate the pace more often than not. Whereas younger teams, maybe teams of first-year coaches, maybe those systems and structures aren't in play all the way yet. They may play to the opposition's pace a little bit more often. The other question from Jason here, also, what does WAB rating mean? I saw it on Torvik's website, but could not find a glossary or explanation on Google. WAB stands for wins above bubble. So basically, it's a metric that would say that, X number of wins above a bubble team. Or, It's actually a metric I don't really use a whole lot. I guess I kind of think of it in terms of weighted runs created plus in baseball, where 100 is league average. Anything above that would be, if you have a 105 WRC plus, you're 5% above league average. If you have a 110, you're 10% above league average. That's kind of the way that I would look at it. Would be, sort of looking at it in terms of, this team is X number of wins better than, sort of an average team or a bubble type of team. So, yeah, not a metric that I use a whole lot over there at Torvik, but it is something that's over there. And, you can Google WAB. I know Seth Byrne has done something with it. And then also, I think there were some other authors that have done some things about WAB wins above bubble, looking at, some of the different ways to evaluate teams, compared to league average or teams that, are kind of on the chopping block for the NCAA tournament. Good questions today on the Monday mailbag. Again, at Skating Tripods on Twitter or Adam at bangthebook.com. Again, I hope the playback comes back okay, and I'll try to do what I can to edit out the coughing fits, and hopefully I'll sound a little bit better as we go throughout this week here on the show.